The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
And welcome back to the cyber insurance episode of Security and Compliance Weekly. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, along with my esteemed co-hosts, Matt, Scott, and Josh. One quick announcement before we take up our discussion with looking at some cyber insurance news of the week. Our next webcast at Security Weekly is February 13th with Sri Sundaralingam, Vice President, Product and Solutions Marketing at ExtraHop, where we will discuss cloud-native network detection and response. Register for our upcoming webcasts by visiting securityweekly.com, selecting the webcast drop-down and from the top menu bar and clicking on registration. Okay. I thought it was interesting when I started looking at news of the week and searched on cyber insurance and had a bunch of stories come up. So we actually have a few to talk about, gentlemen. Is there anyone in particular anyone wants to start off with?
I think the Cowbell one was pretty darn good.
Cowbell?
I'd really like to talk about that.
and I want to go watch the SNL Cowbell skit now, just because I see Cowbell and write it.
More Cowbell!
So the secret to cyber insurance is more cowbell. So please, what is this that they're talking about?
Sounds about right because it's so confusing. But Cowbell Cyber has got now an AI-backed, of course it's AI-backed, everything's AI-backed now, automated way to determine your risk. And I think that's fascinating because frankly, I'd be really curious to interview somebody from Cowbell Cyber because my first impulse is to say that's BS. And if they can back this up, I'd be fascinated by that.
Well, I second that.
Okay, so I can probably get Jack on if you really want to, the CEO. I've known Jack for a couple years
Cowbell
now.
Cyber?
Yeah. He used to work at Lacework, Redlock, Cavern. I've known him about 2 years now. So I can probably get Jack on and kind of talk about what they're doing if you guys want it. It's interesting because Paul and I covered this on Enterprise Security Weekly when they first got funded and came out last year. And now what you're seeing is a press release on kind of where they are in the process because they're a startup. I mean, they've only been around since, last year. I don't think they've even been around for a full year yet. Coming out of stealth. And their press release talks about kind of their carriers and their price points, right? I think it was like $1,100 for a policy for $1 million of coverage or something like that. But we can probably get them on if at some point.
Well, that might be interesting if they're ready for it, because if they're a startup just coming out, I immediately wonder if they really have a product yet or if it's still sort of in the design phase.
No, according to the article, they're selling, right? They have policies available in a number of Western states. Well, if they're selling insurance, they've got to have something, right? So they're working with, I think, 13 different carriers. They're covering Western states. I know Colorado's in that mix, Arizona, and a few others. It seems to be more on the Western states right now where they're offering these policies, which tells me they have a product, because otherwise, how would they be selling insurance into these markets?
Well, and they might think about their name and how that's going to sell on the East Coast, because I don't know if we can relate to cowbells here in the city.
That's probably true. Yeah,
everybody can relate to more cowbell. But it looks from their website that they're using BitSight or Security Scorecard or something similar to pull in information about a company from external factors, and then they're using their experience and their sort of actuarial tables, as well as continuous scans of the dark web, because that's exciting, to get them a priced risk effectively and to set the premiums. So,
I mean, if they're willing to take on the risk of coming on and talking to us I'm all for having them come on and talk to us. So if you want to try to make that happen, Matt, and we'll try to be nice, but hopefully
we'll try.
Well,
we'll try.
So I've seen this concept before. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a single entity focused on it. Where I've seen this is with some of the third-party vendors, right? So you have companies like CyberGRX doing the whole third-party kind of shared component. Then you have BitSight and Security Scorecard doing kind of the external scanning. You're starting to see them kind of merge their two pieces together. And then I see relationships with the cyber insurance companies to then use that data as a way to help the cyber insurance companies price policies, right? What I think Cowbell is trying to do is take all of that into account and really focus on cyber insurance and all these different factors that are part of it, which includes third parties. It includes your external digital risk assets, et cetera, all into one platform. So it'll be interesting to see, how they're pulling all this stuff together if we can get them on. But that's where I'm seeing these interesting crossovers. No one's really focused 100% just on cyber insurance. It's always got some other spin to it with a cyber insurance relationship as kind of a third-party integrated component.
So they need to brand it and call it a single pane PIN of glass.
PAIN.
PAIN. Anyway, it almost sounds like it's a single, well, not joke unintended, or moving beyond the poor dad humor joke. It does sound like they're trying to automate risk as much as possible to pull all the different components into it. So. And the intention of this is so that people can then make a better insurance purchase?
I think so. Well, they're really focused on the SMBs, the small to medium businesses, because the large enterprises, again, they've got a risk committee, they've got insurance policies in place. They're probably working directly with their insurance companies to figure some of this out. Where the SMBs, because they don't have the risk committee, as we talked about in the previous segment, they're probably trying to help them figure out, well, what is the right coverage? What do I need to do to have these coverages in place? And I think they're trying to make it a lot easier for SMBs to embrace cyber insurance in a way that it's not only cost effective, but also realistic for what they need covered and how to cover it. I think that's what they're trying to do.
Well, it sounds laudable in terms of if that's really what they're doing, trying to help people that don't have the infrastructure to make the right decision, buy the right level of insurance. Not who's the there's some insurance company, I see the ads all the time, but the right insurance, no more, no less. It sounds like it's that principle. You don't want to overpay for insurance.
Yeah. And I respect that, but on the other hand, it's, are they getting correct information to, again, price their risk properly? And so that's what I'd really be curious about, to be very honest with you.
Right.
Yeah, Josh, you're making a very astute point. Whenever somebody says, "Hey, AI," we should all be thinking garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't put in the right data to tune an AI, you're going to get out the wrong data, and then you're making bad decisions based on bad data, right? Cowbell, looking at their website, right? They've got a couple of different graphics up, and the graphics that are predominantly across their site are for insurance carriers, right? Insurance carriers that have multiple businesses underneath of their insurance premiums, right? Even though Cowbell says, "Hey, let us help your company with a risk factor index," right? It really translates into blanket coverage for policyholders, And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, well, if we take these risk factors, we display them on a really pretty board, we say we have AI, garbage in, garbage out, and then we throw cyber insurance at it. It's almost like they're trying to throw a bowl of spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks.
Actually,
and
that's really good, Scott.
To take this approach, hold on, let me finish. To take this approach is extremely dangerous. Good luck on them for trying to make it happen, but it is a very dangerous,
but also extremely common in our world. I mean, how often we have product vendors of all sorts just trying to throw something out there. I think we've beat the cowbell enough.
So I'm gonna segue. So
Segue, please.
in the one about cyber insurance rates rise, the third one in my list, there's an interesting point. Allianz SC, which I believe is an underwriting firm, is trying to use the data from all of the ransomware incidents that have come around and happened to actually determine what factors make a company more liable for ransomware to actually occur and spread. Now, they're doing this across MSPs. We've seen several news stories in the past, weeks, months, year or two, that have shown that MSPs are actually a great target for ransomware vendors, or authors rather, because the MSP has their fingers in 5, 10, 100 different companies. All of a sudden, now there's not just one company that you hacked into or phished or whatever. There's 101 because you got all their clients as well. So they're looking at all of these companies and saying, okay, what factors changed to make you more or less liable to ransomware? And we're going to use that as sort of an actuarial table, or at least a risk pricing factor. And I think that's actually very smart. The other thing that's interesting is they're trying to separate out ransomware insurance as a rider. Is that the right term? Rider? So it'd be a separate policy or a separate line item on your policy. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting because that's going to get real expensive real fast.
Yeah, my story number 3, similar topic, the idea that ransomware is driving up cyber insurance costs. So that seemed to be, if there was a theme for the week, that seems to be it. That, but I think to tie both of those together, Scott, the story you posted, which is more of an essay from, what's this guy's name?
Dark Reading, Jacqueline.
Dark Reading.
Yeah,
Chris
Jacqueline. Was it Chris?
Yeah, it was Chris.
Kennedy.
Yeah, it was Chris Kennedy, I think. There it is. I had the wrong tab. I think, some of the points that he's making are sort of addressing some of the harsh realities that some companies are starting to figure out. The one that jumps out at me in terms of these rising costs is, don't expect that your cyber insurance policy, or probably any insurance policy for anything for that matter, will ever cover 100% of the costs that you incur when something bad happens. And I think that's an important takeaway, if nothing else, today. It might help you, it might be a supplement, but it's not going to cover everything, because what insurance policy does.
Well, what really jumped off the page for me with this article, great article, well put together, was one sentence, and it says this: not only will an effectively security strategy help a business obtain cyber insurance in the first place, but choosing to test the efficacy of the controls will help organizations identify flaws before an attacker can find them. Right, and that really is one of the key themes of the first part. Right.
Yeah, but it would only be point in time. It would only be point in time, Scott.
Well, I like the sense, actually, when businesses overinvest in cyber insurance and underinvest in security controls, they're showing they expect to be breached and have their insurers solve the problem, even though they won't. And that rolls back right to the beginning of this whole conversation in the last segment, when we talked exactly about that. Insurance, cyber insurance, is an addendum and a backup to your security program, right, Matt?
Yeah. It's an augmentation. It's not a replacement.
This article mentions, and we mentioned it in the first segment very briefly, the cloud. Without, we could probably do a whole episode on this, but any key points, key takeaways for our listeners in terms of the cloud and how it pertains to A, security, B, compliance, and C, cyber insurance.
The shared responsibility model, ladies and gentlemen, the shared responsibility model. Do you know where your demarcation points are in your responsibilities for your security, your compliance, your insurance, your compliance reporting, your third parties that you're dealing with? How many third parties are you dealing with? Where is your data housed? Who is responsible for your identity and access management and your all of the different pieces of your system, your process, your pieces in the cloud? Yeah. And if you don't know all those things, if you don't have it listed and documented and signed off on, guess what? There are holes. Period.
Josh, what is the shared security model? Because not everybody knows, and not everybody who's listening understands technically deep what that concept is and how much it will play home wrecker on your environment.
You didn't listen either. I said the shared responsibility model, not the shared security model.
Same thing.
Paul and I did an episode on Enterprise Security Weekly last year where I tried to break down where some of those lines of demarcation are in a shared responsibility model because they vary. See, when we say cloud, there's lots of different types of clouds. And it's, if your infrastructure as a service, that demarcation is way lower in the stack because you own the hosts. If your platform as a service, there are some things that the cloud provider will have to do, but you still have to do things above it. If you're SaaS, so they vary. This is not a easy, clean cut discussion, right? It really depends on what components of cloud you're using, where are those different demarcs, and to your point, Josh, is you have to document all this stuff. You have to know, well, I'm running an Amazon. Well, am I running infrastructure as a service or am I running certain platforms? Or, do I have data in Salesforce, which is a pure SaaS play, right? All that stuff varies. But there's three things that are always in scope, I think, for the organization. Application level controls, user level controls, and data level controls. Regardless of what cloud you're using, those three always apply because even in SaaS, you still have to protect your data, who has access to it, and aspects of the application that's interfacing with it, whether it's through APIs or whatever. Those three are common and cannot be really given to somebody else. Organizations have to own those three layers. Then the question is, well, how far down the stack do I need to worry about the network and the endpoint and all these other things? That's where it varies, right? And so there's a really good segment on ESW for anybody who wants to kind of break into that because we kind of covered that. But it's not easy because you got to understand all those different layers.
Well, and hybrid cloud, all these different kinds of things that every single instance of this is going to be at least a custom examination, if not a custom documentation of all those lines of demarcation and responsibilities. That was really well said, Matt. Thank you. That was
and so where this gets interesting from a cyber insurance perspective is this concept of network security is covered. Well, let's say I'm running platform as a service. Am I running an IDS in that environment? Yeah, probably not, right? So that's where things get really interesting is you're paying for coverage that may not apply depending on where your infrastructure is actually running. So you're getting protection for something that maybe you don't have any control over. So why are you paying for that in your policies? So the cloud makes this whole cyber insurance conversation even way more complex.
Right, but when you're talking about, are you running an IDS, especially in a PaaS environment? Guess what? As the customer, according to the shared security model, you have absolutely no interaction with that whatsoever. That's up to the provider, right? For PaaS, with the shared security model, and this may be something that we want to dive into in another episode, you're worried about two things: the data and the application that it rides on. That's it, right? So being able to define where the boundaries are as to who owns what, how that risk is translated is a very magnanimous sticky point for a lot of companies, let alone trying to pass that into cyber insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember getting a panicked phone call from a former PCI customer. It was a couple years ago when I was still at Tenable, because their company, won't say what they are, but a merchant of some sort, was in the process of acquiring another major competitor merchant. They were going to, roll everything together, and naturally they were inheriting a lot of their infrastructure. The company that they were acquiring had outsourced a lot of their infrastructure to the cloud. I won't say which AWS cloud it was. And the person that called me, who was responsible for their vulnerability management, vulnerability scanning programs, was a little bit shocked to find out that all of this other company that they were about to inherit responsibility for, who had a lot of infrastructure in the cloud, nothing was being scanned. And I could just see the process of signing up for the cloud. All your PCI worries are taken care of. All your security worries are taken care of. But and my caution to them now and to everyone is read the small print, because a cloud provider is generally at a minimum only going to provide, and I'm going to talking PCI speak for a minute. Requirement 9, which is physical security, data center security type of controls, basically lights and power for the rack that the host is providing, whether it's a virtual environment or not. They're not doing all the other things like intrusion detection monitoring, file integrity monitoring, vulnerability scanning, patching, configuration controls, change control. The list goes on and on and on. That's still up to the customer that's signed up for the outsourced service. And I think that's the biggest caution when going to the cloud in any way, shape, or form, is just read the small print and find out specifically what you're getting in terms of security services and what you're not getting.
So I'm gonna expand on that slightly. We've run into, I can't tell you how many customers that have said, well, I'm in a HIPAA compliant, PCI compliant, whatever cloud environment, I'm good. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no. And
you're not.
I had to come up with terms for this. And Matt, I love the way you broke that down earlier. I'm going to sort of riff on that a little bit. We came up with the terms that there are data center requirements or data hosting requirements, and those these are just co-located or sort of very basic cloud environments. There are requirements that the data center or the people that host the data are dealing with, and then there are requirements that the data custodian, i.e. you, the customer, have to deal with and have to take care of. So they, meaning the data center, data provider, cloud provider, whatever, may be a 100% PCI, HIPAA, name your compliance standard compliant with. But if you're not doing the things that you're responsible for as the data custodian, that actually, by the way, that term seemed to resonate pretty well, then you're not compliant. Have a nice day.
Yep.
So get the mop? Is that what you're saying?
Get the mop?
It is data custodian.
You have
clean up on aisle 7.
you have to treat the cloud pretty much like any third-party vendor. There are certain things that are covered by them, and there are certain things that you still own from a risk perspective, right? This whole, just because I'm using the cloud, think of it as a third-party relationship. You're outsourcing capabilities to the cloud. That's great. You still own certain security controls, and you still own certain risks associated with that. And a lot of people are just like, look, if I throw it to the, a HIPAA or a PCI compliant cloud, I'm done. And you're not. There's just so many other controls that have to be addressed.
And so it's funny. Segue from a cyber insurance discussion to a compliance discussion to a security discussion and all the way back around again. And it's fascinating how they're really intertwined in such a basic and manner. At the base, they're the same thing.
It sounds like we've all experienced in one way or form with our customer base that companies, at least initially, approached cyber insurance as if not a panacea for their ills, a substitute for doing or investing in a lot of the things they need to invest in terms of meeting compliance and regulatory standards, to do the security activities. So, I mean, this is all intertwined. I think the takeaway is, if you already have a cyber insurance rider or policy in your company, or if you're considering it, don't forget, or if there's one takeaway, it's no substitute for doing basic security, for security best practices, which are very often reflected in the compliance and regulatory standards that you need to meet anyway. If a provider, like a cloud provider, if they're claiming it's a PCI compliant environment, read the freaking small print, because they're probably only covering one of the 12 major requirements.
Can I just say that today's
buyer beware.
Today's major Scrabble points get awarded to Mr. Jeff Mann for the use of the word panacea.
I can't spell it, but I can say it.
Tell us how you really feel about this stuff, Jeff. Go for it. Come on.
Well, I would, but alas, our time is up. No. I think it's been a great discussion today. I'm sure this will come up again, Matt. If you can get Cowbell in the studio, and I do mean in the studio, we should all show up.
I'm there. Not a problem.
Great. All right, guys, that'll wrap it up for us today for episode 15, Security and Compliance Weekly. Please tune in next week. We'll go at it again.